What's up, YouTube? This will be the second episode of kind of doing a light restore refinish on my 1986 Kawasaki JS550 Jet Ski. In this episode, we're going to do a lot of fiberglass work to the hull itself, fixing a bunch of different small cracks and stress cracks, little broken edges around where the hood sits, and a bunch of other little stuff. And then we're also going to go in and we're going to reinforce a lot of the areas that are common to crack and break on these. And we're going to finish it all off by painting the inside of the hull so it looks nice and fresh. This will be a little bit of a long one. I'm going to try and kind of fast forward and go through some of the fiberglass stuff, but I also wanted to show some of the detail of what I'm actually doing. Also in this video, you'll see a few things that didn't work so well. I'm going to include them anyway, just so if anyone else tries something similar, you'll know what not to do, and hopefully it'll be useful to someone out there. But hope you guys enjoy. First areas I'm going to tackle are just these little spots on the inside edge, where the hell that's called. But on both sides, where there were cracks before, on the rails, I'm just gonna basically back the outside with some shiny foil tape, so the epoxy and fiberglass won't stick to that. And then you can kind of see I just kind of taped that on. The other side need a little more support, so I clamped paint stick underneath it just to hold it up and flat, and then a little tongue depressor stick on the front edge. That one's a little bigger, but it should have enough support now, so it's not gonna kind of bend or anything weird or sag down when I put the fiberglass on. What I'm gonna do is basically take a few of these small little pieces to fill in of chop strand mat. This is chop strand mat designed to work with epoxy, but I'm just gonna stuff some of that inside that crack gap first, and then put a little bit of a larger piece over the outside of it, which is going to help just get good adhesion stuff to the SMC material. And then over that, I'm going to put a few layers of actual glass. And then on the other side, similar, I'm just going to take a few of these guys, put them on there, actually that direction, but stuff them in there, fill that up a little bit. I'm going to cover one nice piece around that'll wrap around the outside really easy, and then a few layers of glass over the top of that. Hopefully that comes out pretty good and smooth. I'm gonna sand that down afterwards, and then I'll come back tomorrow and I'll glass the other side of those rails and maybe tackle the inside crack here. I think when I do that, I'm going to repair that, but also probably reinforce both the side walls. Didn't come out looking the nicest to start, but it was kind of sliding around a lot on me. I think part of that just being on that shiny tape. But I put a thicker layer over that section. I end up coming back and adding in a lot more chop strand mat and stuff to try and build that thickness up a little bit. And I'm just planning on kind of trying to get that to set, build up that back wall, and then come back tomorrow and sand it all flat on the top, and then come back on the bottom side and kind of repeat and do the same thing. I left it all overhanging a lot on the top just because I'm going to come back and cut that off real quick and easy. So I wasn't really worried about it. Hopefully that was not a mistake. This side I did second, so I kind of had a little more practice at the point of using this stuff again. It's been quite a while since I've done any real fiberglass work. Packed it full of material to get the thickness right. Kept pushing in the back. I had a hard time getting it all the way down into that crack, but hopefully some of the chop strand mat got in that, and then I'll take a look at it tomorrow, sand that down, and maybe open up that crack a little more from the other side once I have this top layer solid now, and then glue on another patch from the back. So I laid down the first little bits of glass yesterday. Definitely not the best that I've ever done. Just taking a look at it from the beginning, I ended up putting it on a little thicker than I intended. You can kind of see here it's built up a little bit. What we do today to start is just basically come back. I'm going to trim the top of that off. I'm not too worried about sanding anything. I kind of want to wait till after I do the back side of this. And then you can kind of see in here, the glass didn't get fully in to that groove that I ground. It was just too tight of a bend, at least at the top there. So I'm probably going to do is cut that top off and then grind the backside of that and bevel it a little more so I can get the glass from the backside right up to the fiberglass I did yesterday on the front side. So my little trick with the tape worked pretty well. You can see tape pulled off super easy. And I have a fiberglass layer all throughout that area. So now I have something really simple just to build from the bottom side up. I'm going to take this sander over here and bevel this out probably pretty far. And then I'll measure that out, make a few templates, cut a bunch of fiberglass for that. I'm probably gonna end up laying this thing on its side. Hopefully that turns out well. And then I'll end up, probably if I do that, I'll do the crack over here. And then maybe when I do that, I might make a piece to just brace this whole front section and then do the same on the other side. This side, same thing. Took the tape and stuff off. You can see I got glass all the way to the inside of the crack. It's all adhered well. Looks good. Now I'm just going to bevel the inside of that out and then I'll be ready to put some glass on it. So I figured I'd kind of show you guys what I'm doing over here. I started going on this side because it's pretty simple. I have a handful of different patch shapes laid out that'll fit back and over this. And then I have a large veil piece that'll go over the top of all of them. Basically just to fill that gap and then hold everything together. Hopefully look nice. And then what I'm going to do is take this little piece of plastic and I'm going to cover the whole thing with that and then squeegee out whatever excess resin and hopefully be able to hold that in there pretty tight. But the general process and what I'm doing, here's one of the cracks I found in the hull that was covered in that Duraglass body filler. What I like to do is just take a piece of cheap plastic sheeting and put it right over the top. So then I can trace basically the inside right around where my groove is. And then I trace to the outside of where I tapered the hull. So when I was using that sander, I basically brought a layer down here, knowing that I'm going to add a layer of glass, step out a little bit, another layer, step out a little bit, and build up probably 3 or 4 layers out to that normal outside of that bubble. And then on this, I'm probably going to just do some kind of triangle shape or something and put a layer or two of 1708 biax because I know these holes are prone to crack in this front area. All right, so I've got all my patches set up for this corner and they go in, wrap around the bottom, and then I've got these patches over here set up that taper out, starting with the inside crack size and getting bigger about 1/4 inch at a time. I think I have 5 or 6 of those cut. They end up laying pretty damn flat with the rest of the sides of the jet ski compared to what I ground. And then I made these 2 side braces that brace pretty much all the way up to the front of the nose, starting at these back mounts. Layup went seemingly really well. For the first part over here, I added a little colloidal silica to thicken the epoxy a little just to help it kind of not drip down the side and pull off back here. I was worried just on vertical surfaces to have the epoxy too thin, but putting this bag over it also seems to help a lot. It was a little tricky getting it to stay in the corner, but it is now. This big section, it's pretty much perfectly flat across, so I ground that out and patched it real nice. My bag on the top was a little short in the end, so it's gonna be a little messy, but whatever. Overall, it wet out really nice. Everything was kind of smooth, consistent, and have pools of epoxy at the end. I learned the hard way to make sure that you mix the resin and hardener correctly. I didn't realize that the pumps on this US Composites, whatever stuff, are both equal parts. The last time I used this was like 2 years ago. So I did not remember that, and I mixed it equal, or one pump to one pump instead of 3 pumps resin to 1 pump hardener. And that caused the epoxy to not fully set. So I just ripped all of that out, which was a ton of fun. But just cut all new patches for this. So starts small for the center, slowly tapers out to get larger to fill that spot. Same thing I did over here for this corner piece on the inside. And then I traced out with a piece of plastic and a few goes at it. But I made a piece basically to fill in and fill this hole inside all the way up. I just figure that's probably a safer way to brace it. And what I'm going to do with that too is I'm going to mix up a little epoxy first and fill in this bond line. It's pretty uneven all the way down. And I'm just going to mix some epoxy with some chopped strand, long grains, or not long grain, but chopped strands of different lengths I have, and then some Cavasil as well to make kind of a paste and just hopefully smooth that out a little to help the epoxy stick, or not the epoxy, to help the 1708 mat stick in there well and hold everything together. I just don't want any air gaps in there. And then I also have a few little pieces to put up in the nose just where there's some uneven space. Half-inch chopped strand, or chopped strands and Cavasil and some epoxy. And use this just to fill in that crack first. So take two of our fiberglass came out fantastic. Actually cured fully this time. Everything's solid. Held on well. Filled all the creases. Everything's smooth. There's no air bubbles, no pockets. So super happy with that. Kind of sucks that I ended up doing it twice. But in the long run, I'd rather do it right. And it worked out because I really wanted to kind of do this whole side anyway. So I was going to patch it all together, but now it's just one piece, which is better in the long run. Corners came out perfect as well, which is good. Just came out here to take a look at the fiberglass I put on last night. Came out really nice. You can see just where I had a sheet of plastic over it, some little stuff. I'm going to sand this down so it's all smooth. Really happy with it. Everything's nice, smooth transitions. Over here where I was patching the side rail, the fiberglass kept wanting to pull up. So I ended up putting a few tongue compressors over a piece of plastic to hold it down and just a little clamp. And just like that, it ended up working really well. There's no air bubbles on the side like I had on the other side originally when I pulled it up and redid it. I got all up in the nose, which you can't really see, but everything laid down nice. There's no air bubbles I've found. Overall, super happy with it. Again, you can't probably see in the nose, but I'm probably going to try and reinforce or grind out some more of the questionable fiberglass work that was done up there. And then there were a few spots where I found stress cracks previously. So probably going to touch those up on the bottom, clean them up, and maybe do like a thick paste or something just along this edge and just try and kind of fill that into the bottom. So it's not just thick side panel to the thin floor. So after a bunch of prep, we're ready to do another round of glass. I'm going to touch up. I had pulled the first ripper I did off here because I did the same thing I did the second time and did not mix the epoxy and hardener correctly. So luckily I was able to pull that off without too much trouble. This one kind of screwed up the layer beneath it because I was trying to sand off all the old leftover shit that didn't properly cure. So I put some tape on the back side of that to hold it, and then I cut a bunch of pieces of glass too on the top side. I retapered everything on the top, and I'm gonna do that one again. Kind of same deal over here. This side I just went and cleaned up. This cleaned up a lot better than the other side did. I still have nice repair on the back side, so it should be pretty darn simple. I'm also planning, I cleaned up this bottom edge all the way along, and I'm just gonna mix some Cavasil with the epoxy and make like a thicker paste and then just do a fillet all the way down that. I took one of these spreaders and I just sanded it to a nice shape so I'll be able to kind of fill that in. Then if I come around here, you kind of see inside where that old repair was. I sanded that down a bunch, cleaned it up real nice, rubbed it with acetone, got as much of that really out as I could easily. All the loose stuff especially, but I cut a bunch of layers. I'm gonna do a few strips in the front, one on the bottom, one across the middle, then one across the top, and then a few extra pieces where that stress crack is, and kind of brace that up. And then I'm doing one larger piece. You can kind of see the piece I've cut here, one larger piece with a few reliefs cut in it over the top of my individual strips. That's all chop strand mat designed for epoxy, so it'll work well and doesn't have the styrene binder in it. And then I'm going to try and put a piece of cloth over it, and hopefully that won't pull up or do anything weird. a little more difficult than I expected. These corners went great. As you can see, fiber is all wrapped around, nothing sticking up. Went in super awesome, laid down nice. This spot over here, same thing, came out really nice. Made up a batch of the thickened epoxy and just ran basically like fillet on that edge on both sides. Patched this little spot down here that was just a little, it had some like stress cracks and stuff showing, so I ground that down. Patch it all up nice. The hard part was up in here. I did a bunch of layers, but it all wants to pull up around where the glue from the bond strip is. And I've been fighting that for a while, trying to get it in, but every time I push it on one side, it wants to pop up on the other. So I got it pretty good now, but it's probably not going to be perfect. But again, it's just extra reinforcement, so I'm really not crazy concerned. It'll probably bother me a little bit, but whatever. I was doing the best I could. It was just real difficult to get that stuff to stick. Only able to get one hand in at a time and trying to do all that single-handed was just a pain in the ass. So side patches came out good. No air bubbles or anything formed. Other patch came out perfect as well. Real happy with that. Floor, same thing. Up in the nose, I really had a ton of problems trying to put the fiberglass in here. You can see to the sides, kind of there's a little air that got in there. I was trying really hard to get it to form around all the extra glue from the bond line, but it was just really difficult to get the fabric to hold tight around that. I should have ripped up the chop strand mat a bunch and just kind of filled that in first a little more and then started going over it. I thought that the chop strand mat was going to be a lot better and easier to work with than the actual cloth was, but the cloth actually laid down and they're much nicer than the mat did. Trying to get it to stick on there, I was just using a lot more epoxy than I really needed, and you can see a lot of that all drip down in the front. So I'll probably sand a bunch of that off, clean that up, rough that all up for when I paint the bilge. And then these sides came out pretty good too. It feels all nice, smooth. I'm going to sand all that. And then over here, I'll probably try and just fix this piece. And then when I sand down these spots, I'll sand them down. I'll mix up some bearing compound and I'll fill that in top and the bottom sides and everything. A little bit of a thicker paste. I'm just going to go around all these cooling hoses just at the base, one or two of them in the back where they go through the pump. When I was taking the hoses off, the hoses are actually pulling, or these lines are actually pulling backwards in the hull and twisting around. So I'm just going to make a little bit of a paste, put it around there and kind of seal those in a little bit. Nothing too crazy in case I do ever have to remove those or replace them in the future. Same time I do that, I'm going to take the paste and I'm going to fill in where these spots from the foam are. I didn't really like the way it looked, just bubbled out over there. So I'm just going to fill those in and smooth them off so they look nice. And then after that, I'm going to patch this battery box. It looks like the back wall that was broken out at some point. So I just took a piece of cardboard, basically braced it up, taped it in place pretty strong, and then cut a few layers 1708. I measured this and it was like 0.13 thick, and the 1708 is I think 0.044. So I'm gonna do 3 layers of the 1708. But when I had the thickened epoxy, I'm gonna kind of put it across the seam to try and get some on the back side. I beveled this on the front and back. So my first I'm gonna put that thickened epoxy. I might use a little bit of chop strand ripped up in there too, just to get something on the back side so it gets a little more bite. But then my first layer is going to go down about halfway, pretty much to where it will touch here, all the way across on the bottom. And then the next layers get a little bit smaller so I don't get any bunching or anything in this corner. The goal is really just to keep the inside dimensions of this pretty accurate without too much sanding after the fact. And then after that, do when I do the epoxy is to take a little bit and kind of paint the area where you're going to go just to get it wet ahead of time. I did that with the thicker epoxy in the corners and some of the areas I thought were going to be a little harder to get the stuff in. So I'm really hoping I can just get one nice smooth layer on the outside of this in one shot without having to go back and lay up more fabric on the backside. Over here I have my different pieces cut smaller because I know that the corners, as I put more material in the corners, it's going to come in and need a smaller piece. When it's possible, I always like to wet out the fabric first. It makes it a lot easier to put it on. This can be a little more difficult with the chop strand matte stuff, but the biax should be pretty easy to do. I didn't do that for the sides just because the pieces were so big. I didn't really have a work surface that could accommodate that. I basically take one of these chip brushes. I have a bunch of them different sizes, but you literally just dab the living crap out of the thing until you see it get more or less translucent. And once you've got it pretty saturated, I'll take a scraper and just try and get any excess off. You really don't want it to be over epoxied. If this was something more critical, I'd take a scale and actually weigh out the fabric and then weigh the epoxy to match. You can figure out how much epoxy you need. Doing that, you can get really, really close results to like a vacuum bag appearance at the end, and you can get a really strong, just solid layup. A lot of the times, people either over or under do the epoxy, but if you weigh it out, you're always going to get it right. So I'm just getting this layer in and kind of trying to push it into that crease because there is that overlap. I know it's going to want to kind of form an air bubble right along there, but it seems to be pretty good. It helped that I put that thick epoxy in there first in that edge to prevent it from being as sharp of a corner. Kind of same process with each piece. Each one's just a little bit smaller in width. The height stays the same to go to the top of that box, but the width is just so those corners don't fill up with too much fabric and cause problems. I need a little bit of overlap on here just for the fiberglass to have something to bite onto and adhere to, but I really don't need a ton. You can see kind of what I pulled off when I did that. I'll do the other side too. It's a little hard to chop strand stuff because they'll want to come up. Just kind of trying to get it in position as best I can. I'm perfectly fine with it being hanging over the top a little bit because I'm just going to sand that down afterwards anyway. So I'm not really concerned about it being perfectly positioned as long as I keep a good overlap on the bottom one and I get it so that it goes back into that groove because I really want it to be flat against this cardboard backer, so I'm not making this battery box smaller. And then depending what I'm doing, sometimes it goes in a little bit of an easier space. Sometimes instead of weighing this last layer out, I'll put it on and kind of dab it in, and a lot of the time you can use that layer to pick up any excess epoxy if any of your previous layers had too much. But with his 1708 stuff, the shop strand likes a lot of epoxy. I think this stuff, if you do it by weight, you do 1.5 times the weight of the fabric in epoxy, where if you use regular cloth, you just do a 1-to-1 weight of the epoxy to the cloth. This right now is pretty overly wet, so I'm going to scrape that off. taper the height slightly on these, just to try and make kind of a little less work afterwards when I'm sanding it. I'm trying to make sure I get these corners real nice in there, because that's pretty much just got a tiny little bottom edge, and those corners to grip onto to hold the existing battery box. And now that I've got the 3 layers there, which should bring the thickness to what it was previously, I pretty much always do this. It's nice because it kind of holds the epoxy to the top surface, and then if you use any tools, rollers, whatever on here, you don't have to worry about cleaning your tools every single time. It keeps stuff clean. It's pretty damn quick. Plastic's free. I kind of wrap this top around, but it's just nice because that imprint, flat, smooth surface of the plastic will transfer over to your epoxy. Then I'm gonna take a little roller and just kind of press everything together, try and work out any little bubbles that may be in there. I can't really get in these corners well, but I'm not too worried about them. You can kind of see it squeezing all epoxy out the top, which is good. Now that that's flat, again, probably not necessary at all, but I'm just going to take another piece of cardboard I cut to the right size, and just kind of sandwich that in there, and putting a little pressure should just help make sure that that fabric doesn't sag down or anything, while the epoxy sits and cures. I'm going to take one of these things. Now it's a little more solid just to hold that, and I can kind of see already there's some epoxy leaking out the bottom of the plastic, which means I'm really squeezing it good, but should be happy with that. Then I'm going to take the remaining little bit I have and mix in some bearing compound and just hit these top areas a little bit. I'm looking to get this bearing compound basically to like peanut butter thick consistency, like body filler. Yeah, so now it's a thick peanut butter ice. I want it to basically stick in place. I don't want it to run down with gravity. I might even need a tiny bit more now. But I just want to make sure it's all mixed in well. Whenever you're mixing epoxy anything, make sure you always scrape the bottom and the corners. Yeah, I'm going to do just a tiny bit more. Yeah, it's a good consistency. So it doesn't really easily run, but holds its shape. I'm not putting it on too thick anyway, but I should have given myself something to spread some here. I'm basically just putting a thin layer of this over all the glass that I did, knowing that I'm going to go back and sand it. But the nice thing about this compound is it's going to sand really easily. But you still don't want to put way too much on there and then have to sand it forever. Trying to give myself a little extra on this top edge. Try to put that little ridge that was in it back in there. Cool. That's everything we're trying to do. We got all those sealed up around the base. We got the foam plugs covering epoxy. all stand back down. And we got this all clamped together, compressed. I can see a little more epoxy leak out the bottom, which is great, which means we're going to have a really well saturated part. Funny thing, when I pulled a piece of cardboard off, I don't know if you'll be able to see in here, but it actually left a corrugated texture in the fiberglass, so that was a little too much pressure, I guess, on there. But that'll sand out pretty nice. I might have to put a little fairing compound or something to get it perfectly flat. I'm gonna go in here and basically just cut that all flush first, sand down. The backside's like perfectly smooth and really nice, super rigid, and then that extra thick stuff actually kind of filled in those areas around the outside corners and on the backside of that taper that I put in there and ground in. So that worked. Real happy with that. I just have to do a little sanding work and clean it all up. Definitely went a little heavy with the fairing compound. I really just wanted to build it up a lot, so you kind of put this lip here back in. So I just tried to really get it on thick so I can sand that shape back in there. So after a bunch of sanding later, I definitely used way too much of that fairing compound, and make sure I don't do that again because that kind of sucked. Everything else good though, super smooth, flat. All the corners are nice. I tried to build that ridge up. I'll zoom in a little bit. Tried to build that ridge up a little bit. Kind of worked on the backside. There's a little glass I sanded a little too far in a few spots, and just a little inclusion spot there. Probably because I was impatient, started using a little mini belt sander instead of sandpaper. This side came out really good, super smooth across. You can kind of see where the patch was. And this side, I was able to get that perfect to match the rest of the hull in there. And then battery box, really happy how that turned out. I'm planning on painting this hull with epoxy anyway, so it's going to fill in a lot of the little stuff in that. Kind of still bothered me that my little battery box is a little wavy and weird, so I'm going to go back and actually add a little fairing compound to that to sand that down. Aside from that, my plan is kind of just to clean up. I filled a few areas where I nicked it a little more with the sander when I was doing stuff. But I'm just going to kind of do like a final sand through this thing, degrease it one more time. The paint definitely does not look the best. Not sure if I'm going to show that whole thing or not, but it was a big struggle, and basically the epoxy just didn't want to end up sticking to the walls. You can see kind of the bottom looks a little bit decent, but it just ran off all the red areas, the sides. Nothing was really adhering well. Not exactly sure why that was happening. Part of me thinks it might be something with the temperature in here. As you can see now, I'm running a heater inside this thing. I've had the top covered for a little while just to try and warm it up a little. Temps drop back into the 40s today as a high, so I don't know last night when I painted this if it was just a little cold, but overall the epoxy mixed with the color and just didn't seem to go on smooth. Very disappointed with that. I was kind of expecting some really nice results, and obviously I don't have that. Everything's real solid, but I want it to look a little better. So what I'm going to try is what a lot of people recommended, using the Rust-Oleum epoxy appliance paint. And so I just taped everything off. I taped out to here just because I want to cover up that fairing compound and stuff and get something on that before I put a new gasket on there. Obviously the paint on this jet ski is not the nicest on the outside, but I am trying to preserve it as much as possible because this thing's not going to get a full repaint this year. And also I just love all the old 80s stickers on here. like some of these Jet Sport ones and some other stuff. For now, I'm just gonna try spraying some paint on. Hopefully keeping this thing a little warmer. I'll put a few heaters out here. Will help it stick. Hopefully spraying this on will at least look decent enough. Alright guys, we're back again. Painting this thing with this appliance epoxy enamel from Rust-Oleum after having pretty horrible luck using the tinted epoxy method. I thought would work well. This stuff came out nice and it looks good. The few heavy / run looking spots on it are just from the previous stuff that I put on, not this stuff. I was really worried that using spray paint on this was going to cause a lot of runs and a lot of uneven coverage. But honestly, it actually sprayed on really well and covered nicely. You can kind of see, I mean, everything's a nice solid coating. It's still a little bit tacky because it's been in the like 50s all day. Overall, looks really nice. I'm going to try and kind of keep this clean and let it harden up a little bit more for the next few days. And that wraps up the fiberglass repair and fresh paint job inside the hull of this jet ski. It took some time and elbow grease, but now it's solid, sealed, and looking sharp. I showed you guys some of the fails and stuff along the way. Hope you enjoyed seeing that and can learn from some of the mistakes that I made. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, comment, and look forward to the next video that'll be coming out soon. Thank you.